Hello and welcome back. I am Mr. Sosotris, and this week I am continuing my series on spoiler-filled recaps of all of the Wicked books. And today we're talking about The Oracle of Maracoor. This is book 2 of the Another Day trilogy, which is sort of the sequel trilogy to the original Wicked series. And this follows, again, Rain, Elphaba's granddaughter, and all of the adventures that she has. Now, I've said this before, but I'll say it again. This video will contain full spoilers for the plot of the book. So if you have not read it before and you want to read it, do not watch this video. If you want to revisit the book that you've already read it, then you can watch it and it's fine. If you have no plan on ever reading the book but are curious what the plot is, then you can watch this and that's fine. But just know that this is full spoilers. It will ruin the experience of reading the book if you have not read the book. So, let's get into it. Now, this one is my favorite of the Another Day books. It's so good. It kind of works as a conclusion to the Another Day series, but there is still one more book in the trilogy, and that book is sort of a finale to kind of the entire Wicked series. Now, there is also another book that McGuire has recently released. It's called Elfie, and it looks at sort of Elphaba when she was a child. So I will be reading that one, and I will be doing a recap of that one as well. So, the story so far, there's a lot. Rain and Iscanary washed up on a small island inhabited by a group of women tasked with sort of ritualistically guarding a sacred relic and protecting the mainland by maintaining 7 women in isolation on this island. There's kind of like this rules that they have to follow, and there's like ritual scarring of their feet and that kind of thing. And Rain's arrival stirs up this sort of community of women, and they start questioning the nature of their exile. There's a whole lot going on. Also, prior to Rain's arrival, she dropped the Grimoire, which is the book of magic that was Merlin's book. The Wizard of Oz was searching for it. She dropped it in the ocean, hoping to sort of get rid of it and prevent others from misusing it. But in reality, we all know that she had other reasons for leaving Oz, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But she kind of tells herself that what she needs to do is throw the Grimoire in the ocean, and that's kind of her task. Now, when she did this, the Grimoire sort of awakened all of the magic of this land. So spirits, fantasy creatures, magic, it's all sort of starting to come back. And it's not like it brought something new to the land. It just sort of turned what was already there and sort of awakened the magic that was sort of lurking in hiding. And when one of the brides on the island that Rain arrives at is murdered by one of the youngest members, who is she's hoping to find a way to keep Rain there. Rain and the young girl, named Cossie, as well as the sacred relic, which is called the Fist of Mara, are taken away from the island and brought back to the mainland to sort of face charges. The bureaucratic leadership of Maracoor abiding, the mainland, is sort of hoping to figure out sort of what's going on, and also the effects of the Grimoire changed the wind patterns and the currents, and so it allowed a invading force from the south called the Skeeds to invade Maracoor, and there seems to be kind of another attack looming in the future. And the leader of Maracoor, his name is the Vasil, B-V-A-S-I-L, he is sort of convinced that the people are searching for the Fist of Mara, and so he doesn't want it to fall into their hand. The Fist of Mara is very powerful. It's sort of, we understand it on our modern day as it's radioactive, but of course the people in this time and this place, they don't understand that, and so they just think it has this magic to sort of render things barren, to kill plants, to make things toxic. It just has this kind of evil aura, and they don't understand it. They've been keeping it safe on the island with the women, but now that that's sort of been shaken up by the arrival of this invading navy, they figure it's not safe on the island anymore, and so they need to find a way to get rid of it. The man who brings everyone from the island. His name is Lucicles. He's sort of a mid-level bureaucrat. He has a stable, comfortable life he's sort of beginning to resent. And he sort of gets caught up in all of this, but he's very much a follower rather than a leader. So Rain and Kasi are brought and sort of put in jail, and they're brought before the court to sort of determine what's going on. Kasi's found guilty, but before they can get to Rain, sort of a group of flying monkeys arrive, and they're from Oz. They've been sent by Lear to search for Rain, and they help Rain and Kasi escape. And that's how book 1 ends. It's sort of like they escape, bang, and that's it. So now we continue, and we go on there. So we're in part 1. The first section is called A Story is a Room. So at this point, Kasi is about 10, Rain is about 18, 19-ish. They're fleeing after their prison escape. The city's in an uproar because the news of this impending attack by the Skeeds has sort of filled the city. Everyone's going nuts, and everyone is sort of fleeing the city because they don't want to be there in case there's a second attack. Rain and Kasi sort of catch sight of the Vassal sort of seeming to make an escape in his sort of palanquin, sort of covered thing, and they meet up with a man who seems sort of familiar, but they don't really know how, who sort of helps them escape by giving Rain sort of a heavy parcel to carry to make it look like she's pregnant, and they sort of flee the city that way, and the guards allow them to pass the city gates. So the man who helped them escape, he just calls himself Burden, but again, he looks really familiar. He says that he's on a journey to find the Oracle of Maracoor, who is a figure who lives in this sort of castle on the edge of the town, or on the edge of the land, who sort of hopefully can explain what's happening and to help them somehow. Rain sort of mistrusts this guy. She doesn't really know what's going on with that, and so she splits up with him after they've escaped the city, and they go their separate ways. Next section is called Farmstead. Now we go back to Lucicles and his family. His family has retreated again to his mother-in-law's house. They've left the city again. There's sort of tension between him and his wife because in the first book, he took Lyrics with him, his son, back to Maracoor because he just was feeling stifled by life at home with his family. And he wanted to take his son with him because he's like, I need to do dad things and do man things, and you women have to stay here, and kind of thing. And so there's still a bit of tension between him and his wife around that. And people start visiting their sort of farmstead. The girls, his 2 daughters, seem to be, or actually he has 3 daughters, seem to be befriending some sort of bird, but they don't really know what's going on. And his son starts having sort of impressions that there's some kind of wolf stalking around, but he can't see what it is. Everyone's kind of tense and weird. And eventually it's revealed that the bird that the daughters have kind of befriended is a harpy, actually a pair of harpies, who are, again, sort of magical creatures that were brought to life by the arrival of the Grimmery. And so they say that they're looking for a green-skinned girl, and they think she's important somehow, but they don't really know what. So there's obviously rumors going around kind of the magical creatures. And Lucicles explains that, oh no, she's back home in prison. They say, oh no, we saw her on the road. And around the same time, the man who helped Rain escape arrives, and he's revealed to be the great Vassal himself in disguise. He was kind of shouted. The palanquin that Rain saw escaping was obviously like a decoy that he had set to sort of make people think that he was still in the city, kind of thing. But so the Vassal's there. He also has his sort of attendant whose name is Ticheron. I think it's Ticheron. And the 2 of them are on their way to finding the Oracle of Maracoor. And they also explain that, like, they saw Rain escape from prison. They don't know where she is, but they did also explain that they saw her on the road because they're the ones that helped her escape from the city, but they split up and they don't know where she is right now. More people sort of pass by. They explain that the city has fallen. The invaders have kind of started destroying everything. They think the Vassal is dead, but obviously he's the one who's pretending to be this guy named Burden. So now the next part is called Haunts of the Thalassic Wood, and now we go to Rain, and we see what she's been doing. So Rain, Cossie, Iscanary, and the Flying Monkeys are having a tough time in the forest. Her memory is coming back more and more. She remembers her parents. She also remembers her time with Glinda at Mockbeggar Hall when she was a little girl. She also meets a talking blue wolf, and she thinks this is a dream, but she's not quite sure. He's looking for an amulet of some kind. Obviously, it's the Fist of Mara, but again, she thinks it's just a dream and sort of ignores it. She wakes the next morning sort of unsure what is happening or not. They come across a man who's being killed by a giant python, and they kill the python and save the guy, but he sort of treats them with suspicion and moves on. The blue dream wolf sort of comes back later, and he tells her about the Oracle of Maracoor, says that she needs to find the Oracle, and she can sort of make things right. This is where we get sort of the official explanation of everything, where he says that because she threw the grimoire away, it awakened all of the latent magic in the area, and she's caused all the changes. The weather changes, the animal behavior, all that kind of stuff. And he also tells her that it's her job to sort of protect the Fist of Mara from the invaders, because if they get it, it's very dangerous, and that would be very, very bad. And so the winds have shifted at this point, so their ships can reach Maracoor much more easily. And they are apparently looking for the Fist of Mara. So this blue dream wolf of some kind, who's some kind of spirit, some kind of magical being, we don't quite know. He might just be a godlike being, or a figure like a spirit of the land or something, is sort of tells her what she needs to do. She needs to find the Oracle of Maracoor. So one of the harpies finds Rain and her party and guides her through the woods towards Lusicles' house. So now we get the next sections called the Company of the Scarab. And so this is, everyone is sort of together at Lusicles' farm. We've got everyone sort of reunited. We've got Rain, Lusicles, the Vassal, his associate Ticheron, Cossie, Iscanary, all of that. They all set out on kind of a journey to take the Fist of Mara to the castle of the Oracle, because the great Vassal, who's calling himself Burden, he now carries the Fist of Mara with him, and he explains that it's very poisonous. Rain is sort of upset with him because she says, I was carrying this close to myself for, while they were escaping the city, and she's wondering if it caused her to become barren. It's radioactive, so it's what's the damage caused by this? And they call themselves the Company of the Scarab because of the Vassal's scarab pendant that he wears, so because he's kind of in charge. The Flying Monkeys stay behind. They sort of guard the farm, and Lusicles' son, Lyrics, and his daughters, and his wife, and his mother-in-law, they stay there. The Flying Monkeys stay behind to sort of guard them and make sure they're okay, and the rest of them set out. So now we're in part 2. And the next section here is called A Story is a Seed. And this is kind of a long one. So on the road, the company meets a group of the invaders, they're called Skeeds, who attack them. The Harpies sort of distract the soldiers and are able to kind of draw their attention away. One of them, unfortunately, is killed, but the Company of the Scarab and all of them are able to escape. They meet the Blue Wolf again, who explains that the Skeeds are able to track the Fist of Mara somehow, and they won't stop chasing them until they found it, because they somehow are able to sense where it is. They don't really know why. At this point, Lusicles' son Lyrics meets them on the road, having followed them, and there's a whole you should have stayed back, and he's like, no, but I wanted to come with you, all that kind of stuff. He says that he had to make sure Cossie was okay. Previously, before they'd left, Rain tried to get Cossie to stay behind at their farm because she thought that she would be safe there. Rain is sort of determined to find a place where Cossie can be safe and protected, and Lusicles sort of half-heartedly said, yeah, I guess we could watch her. But his son didn't really believe him because obviously, she's been convicted of murder before, and Lusicles is sort of mistrustful of everything. He doesn't change his mind easily. And so his son sort of came, he said, to sort of make sure that Kasi's okay. And so they continue on. They meet a vast earth spirit who's so cool. I love this. His name is Yurkios. And he's like this big giant being made of like earth and rocks and things. He's like a big giant. And he coalesces kind of from the earth itself. He's sort of a spirit of the land. And he offers to help them. He opens up a pathway through the landscape because it's very kind of hilly and rugged, and he opens up kind of a straight shot through the landscape. But he says that he can't leave his spot because he's sort of tied to the land. It's kind of a copper rich area, and that's sort of his place. Yes, I know. And he's not able to leave that spot. They continue their way, and they get through kind of a wet, marshy area, and at one point their cart gets stuck and they're just not able to progress, and it seems like they're never going to be able to make it through. And then Yurkios, this is so sad, he leaves his native soil to come and help them, and he dies and disintegrates in the process, but his last act is to like take them out of the area where they're stuck and kind of put them on a safe spot, and then he disintegrates because he moved away from his place. And this really affects Rain. It's obviously really sad as well to the reader, because, you know, who doesn't love like huge magical giants? And it's very sad when they die. But Rain is sort of hurt by this, and she realizes that Yurkios' story is probably lost at this point. She also notices that when one of the harpies was killed, the other harpy sort of forgot that she had ever existed. And so she realizes that all of these stories that are kind of conjured up by the Grimoire are, yes, I know, are very at risk of sort of being forgotten forever, and that sort of bothers her. Along the road, a strange insect of some kind burrows into Lucicles' foot, and he's unable to get it out. This isn't really a super important plot point, but it's referred to again and again and again throughout the rest of the story, so I will keep mentioning it when it's brought up. Hey, BB. On the road, Rain and Ticheron they get sort of close one night over the fire. They almost kiss, but Iskaneri stops them. And Rain at this point sort of realizes that she's been sort of keeping herself too buttoned up since losing Tip, and she kind of is able to accept now that it was the loss of Tip that sort of caused her to become so upset and caused her to want to leave Oz, and that she was running away because she was so hurt by that, but she didn't really want to think about it. She doesn't necessarily want to pursue anything with Ticheron, although he is cute and she does, you know, like him. She's more sort of grateful for like him as a distraction. He's like, they flirt with one another and that's it, but it doesn't go farther than that. But I do actually kind of like them together, and I wish that they had ended up together. But Rain is sort of kind of starting to grow and evolve, because in the first book she was very like, she was cut off from herself. She had amnesia for a big part of it. She didn't start getting her memory back until the end, and she was just so broken that her mind had obviously sort of closed off everything, so she was just very tightly wound. And in this book we see her sort of start to open up a little bit and sort of become more herself, instead of always having to be hyper aware of sort of what she's doing all the time, and she's able to just sort of be herself. So anyways, next section is called the Caryatids. The bug in Lucicles' foot, it sort of seems to leave, but he's still troubled by pain. The wound doesn't heal, and he keeps walking on it, and so that is still bugging him. They do eventually make it to the Oracle's castle. It's surrounded by a species of sort of living tree people that are called the Caryatids, who seem to help travelers find the Oracle. They reveal they've been sort of subtly leading them to the castle, because obviously no one really knew exactly where the castle was. They were just sort of heading east, and the Caryatids have been sort of moving the trees and like adjusting the landscape a little bit as they go, because they do have a little bit of magic, and they've been able to kind of allow them to find the castle. So the next section is called the Winds of Chance. one of the caryatids tells Rain that as a result of the shift in weather, all the butterflies who usually pollinate their flowers left early because the flowers opened like later than they should have, and so they won't be able to pollinate at all. So it's like they're not even going to be able to have children, basically. And so that sort of bothers Rain. Rain sort of stays behind. She doesn't really feel like she needs to meet the Oracle. She doesn't think it's important. She thinks she's just there just as a chaperone, really. And so the other two, Luciocles and the Fazil, go in and talk to the Oracle, and the Oracle is the Wizard of Oz, Oscar Zoroaster Diggs himself, who landed here after he fled Oz in his balloon. He uses a deck of tarot cards to tell fortunes, and he sort of absorbed a little bit of magic from the caryatids, but he can't do anything, really. He's very old at this point, he's very frail, and he's nearing the end of his life. Now, this is quite different from the original Oz books, because in the original Oz books, they find, like, Dorothy finds the wizard in a land outside of Oz and brings him back, and he's sort of forgiven by Ozma, and he's able to sort of start learning real magic, and he becomes sort of the court magician for the Emerald City. And so he doesn't have any power anymore, but he's sort of a kindly old magician who just sort of lives in the Emerald City and does magic sort of for Ozma. But in this one, he's kind of a, not necessarily bitter, but he's a very disenchanted kind of old man. He's a failed despot. He tried to take over the Emerald City, and he still believes that when he was in charge, everything was good. He doesn't really realize that he was a tyrant. He genuinely thinks he's a good person. But he sort of has set himself up as this oracle just for the sake of it. He doesn't really have an end goal. He just does it because the caryatids sort of take care of him, and the influence of their magic has allowed him to sort of live longer than he normally would, and so he figures he's just going to kind of stay here until he has a chance to do something. He doesn't know quite what that is. Luciocles shows Oz the Fist of Mara. He doesn't know what to make of it. He says it looks kind of like a mallet, like a hammer, but he doesn't really say anything else about it. But when he sees Rain, his demeanor completely changes, and he asks her about Glinda. He thinks that she's Elphaba. Rain explains who she really is, and then he reveals, of course, that he is Rain's great-grandfather, because he was Elphaba's father, because he had a brief affair with Elphaba's mother, and the green elixir that he gave her while they were having their tryst was sort of what caused Elphaba to become green and sort of allowed her to have that kind of strange connection with the real world, our world, that no one else really had. He talks to Rain, and she does reveal that she had the Grimoire, and he sort of lights up at this, but then when she reveals that she dropped it in the ocean, he becomes really angry and cruel at her. Obviously, one of the things he'd been kind of hoping for was like hearing about the Grimoire somehow and figuring out where it had gone, because that was his life's goal. He really, really wanted that. And so they kind of talk a little bit more, and he does sort of a bit of a tarot reading, and there's only sort of one card that seems to apply to Rain. It's called the Ascent, but she doesn't know what it means. He also reveals at this point that he was the one who paid Mombi to turn Ozma into Tip to keep her away from him. He was planning on killing Ozma, but he found a way to do it without killing her. And so obviously this hurts Rain quite a bit, because she fell in love with Tip, and then when Tip was transformed back into Ozma, she felt sort of cut off from the person that she thought that he was. And she tried to connect with Ozma in the same way, but Ozma said, we can't have a relationship because I'm head of state now, and it just wouldn't be proper. So next section is called Ascent. We get a bit of a flashback at this point to Oscar Zoroaster Diggs' story, how he grew up, and then how he came to Oz searching for Merlin's Grimoire. And it's a brief passage, but it's really, really good. I really like that section. Back to the present. Oz tells the group that the Fist of Mara needs to be taken like far away. The Skeeds are searching for it. They won't give up until they've found it. He tells them about his balloon. He says that if it can be repaired, then it'll allow one of them to sort of take the object away. He doesn't know what it is. Obviously, it seems like it came from the stars, he says. And nothing that they could do can destroy it. So I said in the first book that it seemed to be something from our world, like, you know, a bomb, like a radioactive bomb casing or something. But it makes more sense at this point that it was a radioactive, like a meteorite that hit the ground. So that's what the Fist of Mara is. It isn't really anything. It's just a block of space rock, but it's radioactive, and that's its influence that it has on people. So the Great Fazil's the one who sort of is roped into taking it away, and it's not 100% clear if he chose to do this, but it seems like he's the one that's sort of most meant to do it. And maybe he just wants to get away from everything, but, you know, he's gonna take it away. And he at this point, Rain is really feeling guilty about sort of everything that she's caused, because of all of this sort of started when she threw the Grimoire into the ocean, especially taking Cassie away from her island. She feels like Cassie is in danger, and she was safe on her island, and her arrival sort of ruined everything. And so she speaks to Oz again, and while she is disappointed in who he is, he's like a fraud, a former despot. He's her great-grandfather, but she doesn't have any connection to him whatsoever. He does try to give her some useful advice about how she should forgive herself and embrace her sort of latent magical talent, because he knows that it's there. Now, he has sort of absorbed a little bit of understanding of magic from the Caryatids who use magic, like nature magic, and he's able to sort of use a tiny bit of magic to revive Rain's broom. And so it's sort of back to life. And it's not 100% clear if the broom revives because Rain sort of is able to forgive herself, and that's what causes the broom. But I mean, the wizard takes he takes credit for it, and he says that, you know, you just have to know how magic works, and, you know, everyone can sort of use magic, and he sort of does that. So either he's using his own magic, or he's sort of channeling something that came from Rain, or the broom is reacting just to Rain. You know, you can kind of read it either way, but either way, her broom is sort of revived and gets its magic back. At this point, Cassie asks to stay with the Caryatids, and Oz, I guess, but she sort of feels at home with them. She thinks that she feels at peace at this point. They really like her, and she sort of tells Oz, she says, you know, this is one thing you can do in your life that's good, is make sure that Cassie's okay. And so Cassie is going to stay with them, and the Fazil is going to take the Fist of Mara away in the balloon. Rain at this point uses the broom and kind of her shell to sweep up all of the Caryatid's pollen into kind of her shell, and because the pollen itself isn't light enough to blow on the breeze normally, that's why it needed the butterflies to pollinate. But she kind of collects the pollen in her shell that she has had since she was a little girl, and she sort of flies on her broom up above and sort of is able to pollinate all of the Caryatids kind of all at once, and sort of save them, basically. They give her some seeds to kind of help replenish the land that the Skeeds have destroyed, and at this point she sort of embraces the title of the Witch of Maracoor. They sort of call her that, and she's like, you know what, fine, I can do that, because she's sort of forgiven herself at this point. She's reconnected with who she is, so she's got her broom, she can fly on it, and she sort of flies off into the sunset, sort of ready for what's next. And that leads into book 3. So that is the end of the second book. This is my favorite of the 3. I love the arc that Rain goes through. All of the characters are interesting. It's a good mix of sort of lighthearted comedy and genuine human drama. The whole series has a sort of sarcastic humor, like a sarcastic sense of humor to it. And I think a lot of people are put off by that because they think that it's such a dark and brooding and awful series. I've heard people talk about Wicked as like it's just this dark, awful book. And it's like it deals with dark subjects, but it does have this sort of sarcastic sense of humor to it that is very English, but it just works. And this series, I think, carries it. And the humor in this one is a little bit lighter because like awful, terrible things aren't happening quite as awful or as often. But I really like how we see Rain sort of grow from this closed off, sort of buttoned up tight person who's just terrified of connecting with anyone because she doesn't want to be vulnerable at all, to sort of opening up and embracing herself and sort of becoming, you know, the witch that Elphaba sort of never got to choose to be. Elphaba was sort of always turned into a witch by other people. They all sort of called her the witch, especially when she went to live with Fiero's family. And she kind of embraces it sort of sarcastically, sort of near the end of her life, and she kind of goes out mad and has a very terrible ending. But in this one, you've got Rain, who sort of is able to embrace the title of witch in a much more healthy manner, and it sort of becomes a thing where she's able to help people and she's able to bring life, and so she, you know, genuinely becomes someone good. She's kind of, you know, a good witch, as opposed to Elphaba being labeled a wicked witch when all she wanted was just equality and an end to tyranny, and she was labeled a witch. And so there's just a lot of great parallels, and I love the parallels of this book to the original Wizard of Oz book, because you've got a journey, and you know, the Oracle of Maracoor is the wizard in both books, and the things that they meet on the way. And I love the Earth Giant. I love him so much, and I'm so sad when he dies. But this book genuinely is really good. And if you want to stop reading at this book, you can. There is good stuff in the next book, I will say. There's one thing in it that makes me very angry, and I'll talk about that when I get there. But I think this trilogy is still worth reading. The first book is fairly simplistic in its structure, but it's much more of a character study and a look at culture and religion and all that stuff. And I just really like this trilogy, and I really like what McGuire's doing. So I'm excited to finish the trilogy, not next week, but the week after. Next week I'm doing my October wrap-up. After that, I'm going to do the final book, which is called The Witch of Maracoor. And then after that, if I can read it in time, I will do Elfie, which is the prequel, and that will be kind of beginning of November, and then that'll lead us into the release of Wicked Part 2. And I'm so excited for this movie, you guys. I can't stand it. But anyways, that's all I have for you today. I will see you next week, and in the meantime, happy reading. Bye.